Got a little shop update again from Drew's Shop on the Brown & Sharpe 13 grinder. I want to take over and show you the lubrication system. Okay, last video we were talking about the lubrication system, and what it is, it's an oil pump in the back that there's the motor, and it draws from the reservoir. I don't know if you can see it. There's the drain back filter, and it just kind of dumps into the reservoir inside there, and you can see the source hose and the pump is in there. But that's the reservoir, and when the oil pump spins, it's got a suction filter, it goes through the pump, and then pumps it through that hose, and kind of, you can see there, it's the sight glass. But anyways, it comes up, and it comes into the table, and I believe there's a passage inside the center. There's a plug, and there's some drain back holes and stuff for the ways. But one thing I know is the lubrication for the gearbox. That's the gearbox in question. I have it over there and pieces over there. It comes into the top of this reservoir, and actually I want to go through some things in the reservoir. It's got wicks in it, and it lubricates that bushing. Okay, and all this basically drives is the pinion gear. So that's for the table rack. That's what moves it. And on a power feed machine, this back gear is the power feed, and the front gear is the hand feed, and there is a shift yoke in the middle that shifts it left and right. This is just a hand feed machine, so you see there's a face spline on this gear, and there's one on the other side, and that face engagement spline would mate to the power feed gear. You can see the cutout here, and that's the yoke would shift it over, and it would shift it that way towards the front of the machine in hand feed mode. If you look on the back, it's got another bearing. I got the cover off it and gasket, and there's like a drip tube for oil feed, a little copper tubing, and that feeds all the rear bearing, and that's in fine shape. That's good. So basically, because it's a hand feed machine, there's no gear in the back. It's just a spacer. It kind of just keeps that pretty much where it is, and there's no fork or anything. But what meshes on the face spline on the front side is the end of this shaft. Okay, that is, it's actually two shafts. But anyways, so that's what goes in interfaces directly on the pinion gear, which drives the table rack. So I replaced the bushing, as I mentioned in the last video, on this side. And actually this dog plate goes on, which meshes with the gear, but I'm going to leave that off for now. And then there's another gear that goes on it. But I'm going to put this in just for the sake of talking about it. And you can see there's an oil groove and an oil hole in this, so that's how that gets lubricated. Oops. Come on now. Okay, tight fit. So basically how the lubrication system works is it comes down from two wicks. Well, let me start at the top. This trough gets filled up with oil, and it's sourced out of here. See, oil from the oil pump eventually comes out of this pipe, and this is an overflow pipe that goes back to the drain. Okay, so source, I think it comes out of here somewhere. So this sources, and that's a standpipe that maintains a level, so that's the drain. And then if you come over here, there's some other oil ports, and I don't know what that is. But anyways, there's two wicks in there. I hope my camera is focusing on it. But there's a wick that goes down to that bushing in the casting, and there's the rear wick goes just behind it. And there are some other holes down in the oil, but they don't really go anywhere because this doesn't have the additional power feed gears. I think they're drilled but not drilled through or something. But we got two felt wicks here, the front one and the rear one. And there's little standpipes around the wicks so they don't get flooded from the oil in the reservoir. So the oil has to come up ever so slightly into the wick, down over and inside down the tube, front and a rear. So basically, if we go down here, you might be able to see the face spline that engages the shaft in there, and there's like a roller bearing. But one wick, the front one, comes right into that bearing. There's a hole up top, and one lubricates just behind the bearing. It kind of drops it in the casting, kind of in space there through the air. And I'll show you what's going on. All right, it's kind of complicated. That hole is not an oil hole. That's for a dowel pin to pin the bearing. And I don't know why or the bushing. I don't know why you'd want to pin the bushing if it's a press fit. And actually, I made a 1 thou press fit and I left it out. So forget about that one. And the gear covers it up anyways. The gear sits, that gear sits on there. So don't worry about that one. So this hole in this groove, you can kind of see some light polishing. That's from the bronze bushing in the casting I just showed you. And this here is kind of just a hole in the shaft. And that's, well, let me say this. The front wick lubricates the bushing, which lubricates this whole bearing area, and this groove sees to it that all the lubrication is collected from the bushing and goes in that hole. And that hole is drilled down to the center of the shaft, and there's a center hole down the axis of the shaft that goes forward and lubricates this bushing. The shaft is also drilled from this side to that hole, and they do not connect at all. So this hole receives, I'll say, interval lubrication. When the shaft turns, oil is dripping in here, and sometimes a little bit gets wicked into there, and then it travels to the center and out where the spline area is. And what the deal is, there's a needle bearing. There's a needle bearing out here, but there's also a needle bearing inside here on the male shaft that goes in there. And the only time that this shaft spins on the pinion shaft is when the gear is disengaged from hand feed and engaged in power feed. Then there's a differential. But in the hand feed model, even though there's a roller bearing in there, it never spins. So I don't know why they did that. And I'll tell you, actually, I before I analyzed the oil system, I actually took a drill bit and I drilled and I connected this one to this one. And I found out that maybe was not the smartest thing. So I turned a plug out of brass and I put a plug back in there. So this wick lubricates from here, which is where the bushing is, forward to this bushing. And this one lubricates backward to this area where there's a roller bearing. And it really doesn't need much. I think that's why it's a partial lubrication. It goes around, and whatever oil drips in there, it goes in. So this needs the most lubrication. And what it does is it comes through the center of the shaft, and actually there's a standpipe that goes in there to make sure it gets into that hole. And it goes in that hole, and then it comes out that little cross hole and lubricates that bushing. And actually, the shaft is hollow yet, and it comes out that bushing, hole in that bushing. So they're all connected. So the critical thing is to get oil to that front wick, and the rear wick not so much. But what I was thinking of doing, let me get a better angle, I might drill a little hole in that standpipe where the front wick is, like a 16th hole or 3/32. So even though there's a wick, some of the oil can come in that hole next to the wick and assure that I get good lubrication and maybe a little bit extra than the wick by itself by putting a hole in the standpipe. Just my extra mod to make sure these bushings get oil. So I just wanted to give you a quick update of the Brown & Sharpe 13 for now of the oil system, and I hope you enjoy it.